Welcome, everyone. It's the Modern Stage Podcast, and I'm Leah Guy, your host. I'm so happy that you're here. Today's episode is timely, it's important, it's meaningful for all of us, and I have a wonderful guest to share with you. Before we get to that, just let me remind you that you can follow these podcasts on YouTube, as well as any platform where you listen to podcasts, and see the promos and other information on my social media at Leah Guy Live. So follow me there. You can also go to leahguy.com if you're interested in doing self-healing workshops, courses, or one-on-ones with me. All of that information is there as well. Today, we're talking with Donald Altman. He is a nonfiction writer of many best-selling books on mindfulness, and he's also a contributor to very popular blogs and has a program himself. His latest book is a novel called Travelers. I'm interested to hear more about that and find out some really words of wisdom from Donald himself. Donald, welcome to the show.
Well, hi, Leah. It's really nice to be here with you today. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. You're a prolific author. How many books do you have?
I think somewhere around 20 books or so.
Oh my gosh, I have
Yeah.
3, and the thought of doing another one, at least right now, is like, oh my gosh, it takes a lot out of me. It's like a birthing process. I guess for you, is it the same, or you just get through it?
No, it's still a birthing process. And they're all my babies. People say, well, which book do you like the best? And it's hard, they're each different. And now that you've gotten to 3, Leah, I have to tell you, you're going to write a lot more.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's kind of like the tipping point. Once you get to 3, it kind of gets in your blood, and and you're sharing things that are important that people need. So it becomes like a positive feedback loop.
Yeah, that's true. I'm actually interested in writing a screenplay next. So
Oh, cool.
I'm going to try it backwards, do a screenplay and then a book to go with that instead of vice versa. So we'll see. But you branched out. Well, before we get to your new work, let's let everyone in on what you've been doing for the past, I don't know, 20, 30 years in your mindfulness practice and your helping others world.
Yeah, it was in the late 1990s. I actually went into a monastery and ordained as a Buddhist monk in the Theravada tradition. And I did that because I'd had some painful experiences and repetitions in my life where destructive patterns kept happening. And I wanted to know why are these repeating? What can I do about it? And I'd had some good therapists, and they had helped me, in my 20s when I had a major depressive disorder. But I, was in my 40s and wanted to understand this at a deeper level. Well, around that time, somebody had said, "Hey, there's a monk I think you should meet." And this might be a cautionary tale because I met that monk. I ended up going to the monastery. And it's not to say anybody has to go into the monastery to get this insight. But for me, the timing was right. I had just gone through another one of these destructive patterns. And I was so impressed with this monk when I met him. He was a well-known teaching monk from Burma, the name of Uthilananda. I doubt anyone would know his name, but actually he wrote a book called The 4 Foundations of Mindfulness. So he was a well-known mindfulness teacher, and he had this sense of compassion, this sense of availability that being from Chicago and from a tough neighborhood in Chicago, had never encountered anyone quite like that. And my first thought when I met him was, how does somebody become like that? What did he learn? How did he transform? Because he wasn't born that way. I was sure of that. So I had an opportunity to ordain with him as what's called the Sayadaw, or the abbot, the head of the monastery. And one thing I learned from him was that he loved teaching the loving kindness meditation. And I think that's how he developed that wonderful sense of compassion. And so it was really great. I mean, I was very ripe for the experience. And of course, I'm doing the work out here in the world now. And in that tradition, you don't take a lifetime vow. It's not like the Benedictines or the Jesuits, or it's kind of like I take a vow to be there today.
Oh, I was going to ask, how do you get out of monkhood?
Out of monkdom?
Yeah, monkdom. How do you become a former monk?
Well, I had decided it was time for me to take my work, and I continued. The monks were so friendly and kind, and I continued to work with one of the monks after I left, but I felt I'd gotten the lessons I needed to learn. And so I said, I'm ready to leave. And there was actually a beautiful ceremony for leaving the monastery where you hand the robes back in. there was a beautiful entering. There was like a 3-hour initiation. It was an amazing initiation, ordination practice. But leaving, it was just me and another monk. And I, turned back my robes, and I also, he gave me some vows to take with me. So I actually left with something that I practice to this day. And it was a beautiful, it's kind of like stepping out gently. It was just didn't turn my back. In fact, when I left, it was really funny because the pace at which I was moving had decreased, and I was moving so slowly. We were doing mindful walking and meditating for hours a day, and it really kind of transformed my whole thinking process. And when I left, the first thing I did was this was at a monastery outside of Los Angeles, near the San Bernardino Mountains. And LA used to have a wonderful bookstore called the Bodhi Tree.
Oh, yes, I know it
yeah.
well.
So the first thing I wanted to do was to go to the Bodhi Tree, and there were some spiritual books I wanted to get. And so I stepped in the door, and this woman, one of the salespersons there, or one of the staff, said, "Well, what can I help you with?" And I gave her the name of this book, and she darted off like a bullet over to this other area of the store. And I just was in my mindful pacing. I walked over, being aware of my body as I was moving. And I got to the bookshelf, and she was frantically looking. And I just took my time, and I scanned it. So here's the book. I was at a turtle's pace. She was rushing around, but I found the book a lot faster than she did. So I think, yeah, it was interesting. And in fact, I tried to maintain a vow of silence even after I left the monastery. I was go get my coffee in the morning. I write down what I wanted. And at a Starbucks, I'm holding this up, and people didn't really get it. So I thought, okay, I have to start talking again, and start re-engaging. And but it's that stayed with me, and I think, and I try to share it with people that sometimes we're just so frenetic, and we have really what's like so much static going through our heads that we don't have space to really hear our own thoughts.
Yes, it's so true. Yeah, I make a very daily practice of working in the quiet and the stillness and the as little distractions as possible. Actually, I just came to you from an hour in front of the fire, just lying there, and I fell asleep for a little bit and just lied there. It's part of my meditation. It's part of just how I have to go, because I have a tendency. My Chinese astrology is even a rat. I have a tendency to move very quickly and just one thing to the next. And, I can kind of get off on that and just keep going and going and going. And then living in Manhattan for years, of course, that didn't help anything. But I remember a day, you reminded me when you're telling me your story, I spent in Spirit Rock up near San Francisco with Thich Nhat Hanh. He was there, and we spent a day doing walking meditation and, just taking his teachings and so forth. And that was a long time ago. That was, I don't know, probably 95, 96 or something. And the day and the whole experience, it was at that point for me counter to everything that I had really known and, known about myself. I'll never forget the feeling I had laying back. There was a hillside, and I was sitting on the hillside listening to him, and I just kind of laid back in the gentle sun. And I don't know if I slept. I don't know if I went to a different, cosmos or whatever. It was just the most relaxed, peaceful day I've ever had. And even, the walk with him too. Yeah. And we're reminded of how much more is available to us when we slow down and become intentional in our living.
That sounds beautiful.
It was beautiful.
I never did get to meet him or get to do any work with him. What was his presence like?
Just, just kind of, he's small, he's a small man. His presence wasn't small, but he was small, but his radiance, it was just so pure. I don't know how else to say it. It just was pure and easy and there and loving, but not gushing. And, just, it was
sounded
just
a lot like Uthilananda, who I met actually.
Yeah, such beautiful human beings. Anyway, so not to get too much into your personal story, but we do here on the podcast, and it's what I do, and I share a
Yeah,
lot of my own. You've already mentioned that you had patterns of destruction and so forth within
yeah,
yourself. Do
yeah.
you care to share with us what you were battling then? And
Well, yeah. I mean, I grew up in a kind of in a very traumatic, abusive household,
mm,
and so, I think the consequences of that were that I would sometimes freeze if I was confronted with something, um, and I almost sought out relationships with people who were reminiscent of that abusive relationship. I mean, it's pretty amazing how
yes,
we find something familiar,
yes,
even though it may be harmful to us. And so it was a way of maybe really trying to repair that damaged relationship. You get in a relationship with someone who you have the same issue, and you're trying to repair it in some way, but it doesn't work like that.
right,
And you
yeah,
end up repeating the pain. And
yes,
so it produced in me in my 20s, I had a major depressive disorder. What was really interesting at that time, Leah, I also and I went to see a fabulous psychiatrist who really helped me. But also at the time, I started to have transcendental awareness experiences out of the body, experiencing other kinds of visions. And I see it now, looking back, I see it as a spiritual initiation.
yes,
And it was as if I got a view into something beyond myself. I was mired in a lot of pain
mm-hmm,
and in a kind of an oppressive heaviness at the time. And
mm,
so I know that a lot of people listening to this have experienced this from trauma, but we're more than that. And so this gave me a view just to see for a little bit, say, hey, this isn't really all you're about,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so it gave me a sense of hope, actually, and a sense of release. And I'm glad that I allowed myself to experience it and not be afraid of it.
mm-hmm,
We can, but we can reach these kinds of experiences by attaining greater silence and connecting with nature. I think there are a lot of ways that we can have more connective, transcendent experiences.
yes, I agree.
Yeah,
Well, and thank goodness you found your way to help, and that's I love to hear people's stories because it's just amazing how we can navigate through and find our way to help.
yeah. I mean, who hasn't suffered loss and pain? I believe that, if you're in a human body and you have a human mind, well, you're going to experience a lot of loss and a lot of grief in
Hmm.
your life. And, so how do we work through it? And actually, in my book Travelers, the new novel,
Hmm.
that's kind of a theme in the book is the psychiatrist, the main character. He works at a hospital, psychiatric hospital, but he's got his own grief. He's lost his daughter, and it has shattered his life. It's put a wedge between him and his wife, and he can't find a way to heal
Yeah.
until he takes a mystical journey. And it's
Mm.
kind of something that he doesn't want to take that journey. He wants to stay steeped in the scientific, logical, rational view of things, but he's forced to take this journey, and it opens him up. It opens his heart, opens his mind, and I don't want to give away the story, but it leads to a complete transformation of his marriage and his life.
Yeah, it sounds like a beautiful story, a beautiful book.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it just came to me. It was one of those things that I had talked about these kind of things in my previous books, but in a nonfiction kind of way. And I felt it just spoke to me.
Yeah.
I really can't say I wrote the story, and I've heard a lot of other writers say that, but the story really wrote me, and the characters did. And uh, so I'm just grateful that I was able to allow that process to happen. And it
Yeah.
was always magical for me too. In fact, it's funny. At one time of the story, the character near the end of the story has to go take this almost shamanic journey in this wilderness area. And excuse me. And I had him do that. Oops, I'm going to have a little water here. And he took that journey in a wilderness area that I actually have hiked in, and I knew the area part of it. But I had him be in a part of the park I hadn't been to, and I described what happened. And he had an injury. He fell while he was taking his journey, and I don't want to give anything away, but months after I had written that, I was hiking in that park, and I fell
Ah,
in that exact spot, sustained the same injuries my character had.
wow.
I was fortunate. My wife was there to help me out of the park, which he didn't have that benefit. And also, it was amazing as I started to leave the park and I was watching all the things I had described in the book. I was like, oh my God, this is what I wrote in the book.
Yeah. Wow. That's interesting. That's fascinating. Well, it sounds like a great read. And, I hear you as far as that. That's kind of the same reason I'm working on this project. I'm working out as a screenwriter and to write this story because I've written so much, whether it's books or courses or whatever, in the nonfiction way.
Yeah.
And there comes to a point, maybe for some of us, that, you want to tell the story. You want to offer the sage wisdom or the healing or the journey through another means instead of just telling people what's
Oh
what,
yeah.
what to do and what we can do better.
Yeah. And for me, it also was an opportunity to bring people into the world of mental health, into the world of a psych hospital. And I always loved One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So it was a chance for me to kind of take people into that world in the modern day of what it's like in there. And it was a way to kind of share my feelings or the characters' feelings about how mental health in some ways has become very constricted and mechanistic.
Mhm.
And we have diagnosis and we apply them to the patient, and the patient sometimes looks at that diagnosis and it's like, oh, that's who I am. They
Right.
start defining themselves by that. And so this book is showing that we need to get to include the spiritual
Mhm.
element of healing into mental health or into just finding our wholeness. Who are we? How can we get through this life? And that's often missed in those systems.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah.
I see people trying to bridge that gap on places like social media, whether they be healers or authors or teachers or something, but there's it's with words it doesn't seem that hard of a gap to bridge, but in actuality and reality, I think that's what's unfortunately people are going, okay, well that sounds great, but how do I do that? Because we don't,
Mm.
there's not it's the advice or the words aren't infused with experience or here's what's available to help you on your spiritual journey and that kind of thing. So it's much needed. I agree, very much so. Now you're a psychologist. You're a
Well,
psychologist,
a psychotherapist. So I'm a
psychotherapist.
licensed professional counselor here in Oregon.
Okay, do you still
Yeah.
practice?
Well, I mostly write now, um, and I train. I do training for. I've trained, gosh, I guess over 15,000 mental health professionals and doctors, nurses, and so on, in mindfulness interventions for pain, stress,
Mm.
anxiety, depression, and so on.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So, as a psychologist in your practice, where did you then use your writing and books to kind of infuse this other element, that, whether it be spiritual or mindful, or were you always kind of joining those together?
Yeah, I was always joining them together because I got out of the monastery and started to do some workshops on spiritual eating. Because one of the things I gained from the going into the monastery was how the monks were so mindful at mealtime and they were so present with everything. And
I
I'd
thought
always
you were
been
going to say, I thought you were going to say one of the things I gained was 40 pounds.
no, no, I didn't. But that's funny. But uh, what they did was this presence that they had was beautiful, and yet they didn't eat during the meal, but they were very attentive to everybody. So if you finished your meal, next thing you knew, somebody was holding out a bowl of rice for you or something, and there was just a real connection, right?
Mm,
And and I had always been a mindless eater, right? It wasn't what I was eating; it was more what was eating me,
mhm.
right? And so I started to do spiritual workshops on mindful eating. But at the end of the workshops, people would come up to me and they'd whisper in my ear, kind of, I have this eating disorder. I have anorexia, bulimia,
Mhm.
binge eating or whatever. And I was kind of like, whoa, I don't know how to help. How do I work with these people? So that's what prompted me really to go back to school. I went to grad school at that point, and I was 50 years old, and it
Oh,
was something I never anticipated. But after the monastery, my life turned in a completely new direction, and I ended up working in an eating disorder clinic for several years, actually.
interesting.
But yeah, and bringing mindfulness to them, and they
Mhm.
loved it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting path. Thank you for doing what felt called to do to help other people, even when you didn't know how. Yeah, that's a heartfelt move
Yeah.
there.
Well, yeah, I feel I was very lucky to get into this field and that I was able to work with mindfulness because when I first got into the field, um, I was wondering, well, how are they going to accept mindfulness? But it turns out that's when mindfulness-based stress reduction and John Kabat-Zinn was really starting to take hold. So the timing was just right. You know, it's so interesting how when the time is right for you, the doors start to open. And I
Yes.
think you need to notice where are the doors shutting on you and where are they opening.
Yes. Oh, thank you for that reminder. It is so true. And we can spend so
Yeah.
much time and energy, just looking at the closing doors and going,
Mm.
why? And something's
Oh
wrong here
gosh,
and life
yeah.
sucks and all of this. But, while we're looking at those closing doors, there's opening doors right over here happening for us. And
Absolutely.
it's hard to see them if you're focused on the ones closing.
No, that's right. That's right. And that was an interesting kind of lesson I learned. But when I went into this field, all the doors started to open and it almost kind of amazed me.
Mm,
Um, but it was an affirmation, right? That this was the right path.
yeah. And so you're on
Sorry.
psycho that's okay. On Psychology Today, are you still, writing the mindfulness blog there?
Yeah, I do the practical mindfulness blog on Psychology Today, which has really been a lot of fun because I put a little research in there, I'll share some information about clients, and I always include some kind of a practice at the end of the blog. And I think people are hungry for tools. They want to learn how to, what can I try? It's kind of new, fun thing that I can explore to learn more about myself and better my life. And I think that's why we're here. We're not here to be worried to death and but we're here to find joy. And I think we're here to help others and relieve suffering. And so it's a beautiful opportunity every day that we have. Sometimes I'll ask people, so who do you admire in life? And they'll name somebody and they'll say, oh, but I could never be like them. I'll say, well, I think your next action can determine if you'll move in the direction of who they were. They weren't always that person, right? They took all these little actions.
Mhm.
And every time that we have a struggle or that we maybe fail at something is an opportunity to move closer to where we would like to go.
Yeah. Well, tell us a couple of your favorite mindfulness tools or the ones, maybe let me say favorite
Oh,
in
yeah.
means of that have worked for you that you apply in your life to stay mindful and present and find peace in your days.
That's a great question. And I have two of them I'd like to share. One has to do with just taking a breath, right? And this is about fidelity to this moment, right? I can take a nice breath in and feel it going down into my abdominal area, feeling that expand. And then I can exhale. I can even combine that with a beautiful word like I can breathe in, love. May I be loved. May I have compassion. And I can breathe out, may all beings have love. May all beings have compassion. And you can breathe in whatever you need with one breath and breathe it out to all beings with the other breath. So
Mm,
that's a nice way of having fidelity to this moment. The other thing is a practice that has really kind of taken off. And I mention it, I think, in most of my books. It's called and it has an acronym, it's called the GLAD practice, GLAD. And I've used this for people with severe depression or really whatever they have. It seems to enhance their lives. It gets them out of their head. So the G is one thing I'm grateful for today, one thing I could appreciate or have gratitude for. The L stands for learning. What one thing did I learn today?
mm,
And it might mean I learned something. Maybe I learned something about someone else, or maybe I learned something about myself,
mhm.
right? A is for an accomplishment. And we sometimes get too stuck on thinking of accomplishments as that big thing that'll get at the end of the rainbow, right? That big accomplishment I want to reach. But I think accomplishment needs to be viewed from the standpoint of what all the little things you do to support yourself throughout the day, all the little self-care things that you do. Getting enough sleep is an accomplishment. Eating protein to get your frontal cortex, your executive center of your brain working is an accomplishment. I even think that getting dressed in the morning is an accomplishment, and
Right.
it's highly underrated, actually.
Yes, it is.
You think about how much effort and thought and decision making and follow through goes into that. We could be grateful and see that as an accomplishment. And then the D is delight. What one thing brought me a sense of joy? Did something maybe make me smile today? Did something make me laugh? Maybe we saw something joyful. The man I worked with who had severe depression, I gave him this GLAD practice, the GLAD practice, and he came back in a couple of weeks. And so I was checking in. So how did that GLAD practice go? And he said, well, something really amazing happened. He said, I heard a bird chirp that reminded me of springtime, and it gave me hope. So we never know what small but profound thing could happen in someone's life. But unless you have a structure for getting out of your head, you might just be spinning in rumination or negative thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know for myself, I cannot tell you how many times with like for the breathing, for example.
Yeah.
And I know because I teach this stuff and I've been immersed myself in the healing world for, multiple decades. And on the one hand, on the conscious, part of my brain that wants to judge things or whatever, I go, oh my God, don't tell me to breathe again. But on the other hand, every time somebody reminds me to breathe, I breathe and I feel so much better, or when I think to have the breath, it's
Yeah.
so small that we think it is meaningless, but it is these small things that can change us.
Yeah, it's these small things that change your life. And that the original meaning of mindfulness, actually the word sati, which is a Sanskrit word, it originally meant self-remembrance and self-recollection. So that just reminding ourselves to do these little things brings back the fragmented parts of ourself back into wholeness again. And that's how I kind of like to think of mindfulness, actually.
Yeah, the wholeness, right? The
The
wholeness of the
wholeness.
presence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we're looking at screens all the time. I don't know about you, but I mean, I have my phone, and I've actually noticed since I've started using phones, and I started the texting when I met my wife, and she said, "Oh, do you text?" And I really didn't. And I paused and like, "Oh, yeah, I text." And she was like, "No, you don't." She knew. But ever since I've started to text, I've noticed my mind kind of speeding up. And I remember the first time I texted somebody and I didn't get a reply.
Uh-huh.
And I, got a little impatient there. And I was like, oh, I called it text expectation. But so, we need to balance technology. Technology is great, and we couldn't be having this fantastic conversation without technology. So it's really great, but how do we create a balance with it, a healthy balance so it works for us? A lot of people that I worked with, I would have them take an exploration of time spent. It was kind of an inventory I had, and it wasn't a judging thing, but it was something for them to just kind of measure how much they did different activities throughout the day. And one of the activities was face-to-face connection with a significant person in their life. And I had people say, well, can I count the time, during a commercial when I put it on mute, put the TV on mute? That was the only face-to-face uninterrupted time they had with that other person.
Yeah.
So I want people to really kind of think about how is technology maybe affecting your relationships. Another time I was in an airport, I was headed off to do a seminar somewhere. It was early in the morning, and there was a little girl there with her mother, and her mother was on her phone, and she must have been texting someone, having fun, because she was like, her face was lighting up and everything. The little girl was looking up at her mother, trying to get her attention. The mother wouldn't respond.
Yeah.
I was thinking, wow, what's going to happen years later when this child, grows up and her mother turned away from her.
Yeah. For a phone.
Right. For a phone. Yeah.
Yeah. I know it's a little worrisome. I mean, we have to, I guess, roll and adjust with how times change. And like you said, I'm very grateful for technology. And at the same
Yeah.
time, it can become a real a third wheel in a relationship and an addiction very quickly.
Oh yeah. Wow. I've had clients who, I mean, you know, who got addicted to pornography on the internet. It's almost like, and I have a friend who works in the field, and he calls the internet crack cocaine for, pornography is like crack cocaine on the internet,
Mm,
and where people's lives were really torn asunder, and there was a lot of feelings of betrayal because of this, and it wasn't that these people didn't care or love their partner, but there's, it's easy to get addicted.
mhm.
And so it's something that I would work with people on values and say, what do you want in your life, and how can you be transparent with your partner, right? So that you start changing your behavior.
Yeah.
And it did help people when they started looking at, what do I really care about? And oh yeah, I care about my wife, I care about my daughter, I want to keep my family together. That's the most important thing.
Right. We can lose sight of that very easily, especially when we're not mindful about
Yeah,
what
yeah.
we're doing. Yeah. Do you miss working with clients, or are you happy?
Yeah, I do miss it. It was a special kind of relationship you have with somebody.
Mhm.
And so yeah, giving that part up was hard. It was when I was traveling so much that I really couldn't maintain doing all the work with the clients in the way that I felt they needed. So but it was yeah, I feel even to this day, I think about a lot of my clients that I had, and I just send them loving kindness, and I hope they're well.
Yeah, I understand. It is a very special relationship. I have limited my clients, but I, I feel like I always want to have some of that, and I'm trying to figure out how to move forward with that.
Mm.
So it's always curious. We all evolve and grow and change in our careers and our relationships and so
Yeah,
forth. But I think when you work one on one with someone in their personal life and some of their most, mm, I don't want to say important, but some of their deeper parts of themselves, it's quite a bond that you form.
it is, and there were times when I was going through difficulties when I got divorced, for example. It was a very hard time for me, and I can remember being outside of my office in the rain, just walking outside before a session because I felt I needed to get grounded, or I
Mhm,
might, put my hands on a tree, and I was crying,
mhm,
and it was a loss, right? It was that talk about grief.
mhm.
And I'd come back in and compose myself. And I remember one time one of the clients said, "Wow, you're always so calm." And I was thinking, well, if you had seen me a few minutes ago.
I know. It's so
Yeah.
true. I've had that too.
Um, and
Yeah.
there were times that I did disclose certain things. Um, for example, that I was divorced. If somebody was going through something, they said, "Oh, you don't have any problems in your relationships." And I was like, "Well, actually, I got divorced not too long ago." And so there were times when I felt it was appropriate to disclose.
Mm,
Um, and it was more honest. I felt more authentic with the client.
yeah.
But always it's about them. It's not about me. And
Right.
so yeah. So
Right.
there's a boundary there.
Right. Well, I'm curious to know which of your many 20 books that you've written on mindfulness, whether it's mindful eating or mindfulness in general, which is your favorite? I know that's impossible because they're all your children, but
Yeah.
which one did you really connect with, and or what's your best-selling book?
Well, the best-selling book is the Mindfulness Toolbox, without a question. And that's been used by a lot of clinicians. It's usually one of the top books in the psychology category or medical counseling category. And it's a really good book because it's got detailed handouts. And I think that's why clinicians like it, is they can give a handout to their clients, something to do with things, overcoming anxiety or depression or stress. And then the client can practice it and have something tangible right in front of them, and then come back and process it. What was it like? And
Mm,
go more deeply into it. So it's a really nice tool. But also, I've had a lot of people, just individuals, who've gotten the book for themselves to help them heal from
yeah.
some of these things. So there's that too. I also I guess I have a fond, if you want to learning mindfulness, like in a systematic way, in a structured way, my newest book is Simply Mindful, a 7-week course and practical handbook for mindful living. So that book looks at ancient mindfulness, modern ideas of mindfulness, and it kind of has the benefit of bringing all the years of my understanding of mindfulness and how I have learned how to teach it and help it work for people is in that book. And there are like 30, like 35, 36 exercises in there. So it's a really good book for someone who wants to just kind of get nitty gritty with mindfulness, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's
Yeah,
simply mindful or simple mindfulness?
that's simply mindful.
Simply mindful. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Good. Well, we were talking a moment ago about bridging this gap between mental health and spirituality. And so for you now, where you are in your life, do you consider yourself more of a mental guy or more of a spiritual guy?
I've always considered myself a spiritual guy.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, I think I really have. But I've found that being in the mental health field helped me, gave me, I guess, gave me some certification that I could work in that field and help people. And I learned a lot of other kinds of modalities to work with people. I have used a lot of cognitive behavioral, but I mix it with mindfulness and um, cognitive behavioral, dialectical behavioral therapy, some internal family systems, different things like that. But for me, it's always really about the relationship with the client. And no matter what therapy you're using, if you don't have that relationship, it's just not really going to be the best most effective therapy, I don't think.
Yeah. Um, I just wanted to ask for, well, and to hear your take, but
Uh,
the benefit of the audience, some people may be confused about what is the difference for you between mindfulness and spirituality?
well, for me, mindfulness is a form of spirituality
Hmm.
because it's connecting me to the world in a deeper way. Um, I'll give you an example. Um, one time I was uh, trying to decide if I was going to leave Los Angeles. I was living in LA for a while and couldn't decide if I was going to leave or not. And different things were happening in my life. But I was very attentive. I was in a park, in a beautiful park, and I just sat and I noticed I like to look at nature. And I think it can inform us and and help us. And all of a sudden, as I was thinking about this, should I go or not? You know, a lot of things holding me back in LA, keeping me there. I noticed a couple of leaves fall and then more. And finally, this tree let go of all its leaves. I wish I could remember what kind of tree it was. I've never seen that in my life. The entire tree just said, we're letting go. And that was like, okay, I've got to let go. What am I
Wow.
holding on to here? So right then it helped me with my decision. It was like, here's my, nature is saying it's natural to let go, move on.
Mm.
Right. So,
Hmm.
but if I hadn't been mindful, and so, the spiritual and the mindfulness for me are kind of intertwined.
Yeah. Well, I think the way you said it initially, which is mindfulness is part of spirituality, meaning for me, the way I think of it is there's a lot to spirituality in a certain regard, and mindfulness is part of that.
It's
Maybe
just
not
it's part
all
of
of it.
that.
Yeah.
It's not all of it. Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
And the spiritual part of how we can, um, in the book, I call it the quantum collective,
Hmm.
is entering this space where everything is connected, even past, present, future, it's all there. And I just think we are beginning to explore some of these realms. And, you know, as conscious beings, I think we're the awakening of the consciousness of the cosmos, actually.
Yeah.
So I've for the first time in my life, I guess I'm moving a little bit away from being constrained by the psychological point of view, and I'm seeing the limitations in that.
That's very freeing, isn't it?
Yeah, oh, yeah, I think it is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting from where I come from because I trained in energy medicine and mindfulness
Mm,
and channeling and various different spiritual traditions and so forth. But I do have quite a bit of understanding of psychology, not nearly to where you do at all. But and working with clients as, some form of, I don't like the word healer, but shaman or guide or helper or what have you, body worker, it starts to get real blurry in the middle about, a lot of people then start wanting to come for psychotherapy or psychology, mental health support. And for me, it's all connected, and I'm sure it is for you too. So there is definitely a connection there, but I feel I have felt restrained myself in my last book, which is Overcoming Toxic Emotions. I tried to talk about it in more of the way of energy and vibration and frequency and attachment and, familiarity, how we get into emotional addiction and so forth. Because I don't have the licensure, to talk about the psychology aspect. But even still, there's that little constraint there. I catch myself, I watch myself of, what you can or can't say. And I think in that way of spirituality, just like what spirituality is in and of itself, it's unlimited. And when we can converse there and work from there and support from there, we're free, right?
Yeah. So the spiritual healing is really, I mean, when somebody's sick, there's always a spiritual answer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I'd like to, well, I'm going to get a hold of your book, actually.
Oh, good. Yeah, it'd be interesting. Don't judge it from a psychologist standpoint.
No.
But it's
No,
always,
because I like that you're working in all those other areas.
yeah. It's interesting though, when I lead workshops, I just led one last week and there was 2 psychologists there and I was like, crap, here we go. They're going to try to tear me apart, but they didn't, because like you and I, they're into a higher understanding of consciousness, and they're there for themselves. And I think a lot of people, even and many people who struggle with mental health or emotional health, and we have had a lot of traumas, it can be very crucially helpful to work with a doctor, a clinician, a psychotherapist, a psychiatrist. As you know, as I know, when we are in those spots of really trying to understand and work through depression, anxiety, and the traumas that we've had and so forth. And sometimes at a certain point, we don't get much more help in that way because our mind is full trying to just make sense of everything. And I find if I step back and get into this other part of me, the true self, the expansive self, the self that can just be and listen, then I have relief and I start to have understanding that my mind wasn't capable of,
So
that's what it is for me.
if you're working with somebody with trauma, do you use energy practices on them?
I use a combination. So I definitely do talk therapy and, just kind of understand where they're coming from, to hear their stories, to hear the looping patterns, to
And
hear
that's
all of that.
important.
Right. And their core wounds, if they're dealing with shame or guilt or fear or whatever their issue is. And then from there, whether I'm in person or even on Zoom, we often go into what can feel like a meditation or kind of a regression. I don't do hypnosis, and then I do some energy work. And sometimes we talk through that, and using tools like soul retrieval work to bring parts of them back, as you were saying earlier, to create that wholeness for them and those specific ages of them that separated in that state of trauma. So I do some of that. I do some meditation work and some hands-on energy work. And
well, that's great to hear, because I think there are so many different kinds of healing and layers of healing.
Yes.
And and that's kind of what I'm saying too in travelers, is let's not just think this is the one way to do it.
Yeah. Well, as far as your book promotion goes, when did it come out?
Well, it just came out, let's see, last week.
Oh, okay.
February 1st.
Okay. So congratulations.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, it's exciting for me to, I think this book could have an impact on people's lives. And I think it could be an inspiring story for them.
Yes. Do you feel like you're going to have to market it a lot harder than the others because of its change of nature, or not so much?
Yeah, I think because of the kind of book it is, it's going to require, I think, more getting it out there. People, because I'm kind of known for that other kind of book. In fact, it's funny. I've had some people who read this book who got back to me and said, "Hey, that character, that's you, isn't it?" And I was like, "No, this is fiction.
Uh-huh.
This isn't me." And the first line of the book is it's a psychiatrist writing this book. He doesn't write books, so he says in there, he says, "Let me begin this book with an apology of sorts. I'm a board certified psychiatrist, not a book writer." And I always say to them, I would never write that about one of my books. I'm not going to apologize, but this character did. But I think it's kind of funny that people think that it was me in there,
Yeah. Yeah. I love books like that. Of course, I haven't read yours yet, but to get a sense of what it is, I think that some
Yeah,
of the most profound and impactful books in our history of healing and spirituality and wellness and so forth have been books like this, where a person, as you said, doesn't have to try to understand themselves or psychology or mental health. They can enter and travel. I didn't mean that
yeah,
pun, but travel
yeah.
into the storyline and absorb and see themselves in there, and now they're part of the journey, and I
Oh,
think they're
yeah,
hugely
yeah.
impactful books.
I
So
mean, that's the beautiful thing of reading fiction. It takes you to new places, and I've I've had a thing for books since I was a little kid in grade school. We had a book fair, Leah, in the grammar
yeah,
school, and that was the highlight of my year.
right.
And so there were all these books with these great colors on the covers, and I used to look them up, and I wanted to buy all of them, but my mother was like, "No, you can get one book."
Uh-huh. I remember those days. Yeah.
And to connect with readers from the other side, from writing books and connecting with people who could read that and then share their feelings with me, it's just very satisfying. It kind of goes full circle for me,
Yes.
and
That's
probably you feel the same kind of thing, I would guess.
Yes, in my books for certain, but I am eager to give my hand at this
Yeah.
storytelling. It's I'm excited about that. Well, I'm happy for you and proud of you and thankful
Oh, well,
for
it's
you.
kind.
So,
Thank you. Very
yes,
kind of you.
all the
Thank you.
things that you've provided for our people and the world in your time here. So, thank you for that, and thank you for being on the show.
Oh, well, thanks so much, Leah. I mean, I really enjoyed our conversation, and you made it a conversation which was fun,
Yeah.
which they don't always turn out like that. But thank you, and
Oh,
also for the work that you're doing. It's beautiful.
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Where can our listeners find you, Donald?
Well, you can find more information about me at mindfulpractices.com. That's MINDFUL practices.com. And you can see my books, my online courses, my CDs are there. And or you can email me if you had questions about our conversation today. And Travelers and my other books also are all the online bookstores, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, your independent bookstores, or they're available by order through your favorite bookseller. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I hope this one goes really well for you. It's a beautiful cover, it's a beautiful concept, and I think it'll do real well.
Oh, bless you. Thank you.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you, Donald Altman. And for those who are listening, thank you so much for staying, for enjoying. Please share with your network. Let other people benefit from the inspiration, information in these podcasts. And we will see you next week on the Modern Sage podcast.